Chapter 1. Helvisti. Nora took in a deep breath as the ship sailed out of the harbor and tugged at her long fur overcoat that blocked the cold wind as she turned for one last look back at the city. She would miss Takroon and its cozy, bone-white wattle and daub buildings with their shaggy thatch roofs. She watched them fade away until all that could be seen was lush green hills dotted with flocks of sheep and smiling shepherds that waved at the ship as it sailed on by. Both sheep and shepherds seemed to be so happy. Those lovely green whirling hills seemed so quiet and peaceful. Day by day she watched the landscape change, from pleasant, lush green hills to dark, gloomy, and jagged granite. These mountains were not green at all. Any speck of color was the beginning of a pale blue glacier peeking over the jagged ridges. Nora grimaced. Even the pine trees near the shoreline seemed more black than green. The crew trimmed their sails as the ship slipped into the busy sea lane that led to their final destination. Her determined sky-blue eyes gazed up at the Helvisti lighthouse on the snow-capped mountain that overlooked the city and large port below. The city stood out like a gem wedged between two seams of granite stone. Nora suspected the brightly colored buildings of randomly assorted, vibrant purples, blues, and bright greens were to make up for the perpetually oppressive, gloomy gray clouds and harsh, jagged, snow-capped mountains that sheltered the city from the Baru waste beyond. Nora dipped her chilled nose beneath her red scarf. She was glad Vila had gotten it for her. She had initially refused it, but during their brief stop in Talgroon, he had bought it anyway, and halfway to Helvisti, he had regifted it to her, which she begrudgingly accepted. It wasn't purely out of pride. Naturally, while in her military uniform, she was expected to follow strict regulations. A bright red scarf, no matter if it was the finest, warmest, and softest Talgroon wool in all of man, it did not match her green military dress uniform, and although she was breaking regulations, she was now too cold to care. After all, with rank came privileges. She was no longer a starry-eyed, fresh-faced field mage. She was a war mage, and as a war mage, she was soon to take charge of her own regiment of 2,000 soldiers, which left her only 10 other peers who could openly disapprove of her shortcomings to her face without being in danger of demotion, and merely 2 others in the whole province that had the authority to issue any binding commands. Not that they could or would. For example, Governor von Claris was an elected civilian leader and had no idea what the exhaustive dress regulations were to begin with. And General Samuth Gordon, well, he would have to talk to her dragon. Right then, a hollow knot formed inside her stomach. As she remembered the dragon's final moments, as she stared helplessly down at Goldeneye's broken body, and remembered all the promises she gave him. Promises that if he just stayed alive, she would make everything better. She had tried so hard to save him, only to be told she would have to put him down. Even now, her vocal cords were painfully raw and hoarse from the gut-wrenching scream of denial. But no matter how much she wanted to save him, no healer could mend him. The one who had tried had lost her life in the attempt. If Nora had the gift of healing, she would have died as well, even given up her own life if she thought it would save him. Some might have pitied Nora for losing her dragon, but no one would ever forgive her for killing Maya, not even herself. The gift of healing was rare, and healers had their own hierarchy and answered to their own exclusive rank structure. A healer could just about snub their nose to any mage or dragon rider, so long as they were in good standing with their own. While the position of a field healer would be hard to fill, there was only one Maya, and she would never be replaced. Punishment was deserved, and restitution impossible to pay. Truthfully, she wished she had been flogged for the incident, but instead of being forced to pay restitution and dragged through the street, she was promoted. Sort of. Nora had been sent to Helveste, the northernmost province in all of Marin, and tasked with the responsibility to take charge of the Dragon Wing and assist what was affectionately called the Lonely Division, or the Frozen Chosen. Of all the provinces, it was the largest, with the second fewest soldiers, second only to Barlington, which was the innermost province, protected on all sides, and was primarily comprised of farmland as far as the eye could see. Nothing bad ever happened in Barlington. For that matter, nothing happened in Barlington, and she missed that. If she had her way, she would have taken her lashings, shaven her head, and retired into obscurity, and found a mud hut to live in. That was not to be. Instead, she was sentenced to roam the frozen Baru desert for the next 6 years. Nora wanted to curl up in a ball, but she couldn't. She couldn't and wouldn't because her sword companion stood beside her like a big, dark, warm, powerful furnace that radiated with excitement. She could sense the big man's presence. He was close to her, so close she could touch him. She turned, and her eyes went wide at the sight of dark, bare skin. Her gaze followed the black tribal tattoos that wound their way up his massive arms and chest. He had a radiant grin on his tattooed face as he took in the fresh air. "It's snowing!" Nora exclaimed. A deep hum resonated within his chest as he savored the brisk, cool air. Vila agreed. Nora couldn't help but be flustered. The rich, vibrant timbre that resonated from Vila made her feel warm all over. This ruined all of her pre-made plans to be absolutely miserable. Well, It wasn't so much that she wanted to be unhappy. She just didn't feel it was right. Being happy, after all the suffering she had caused, did not bring her any closer to restitution. She did not expect any of the mages in the Mender's Hall to ever forgive her, but she hoped somehow she could do something that would at least allow her to look in the mirror again and not feel absolutely wretched for having the audacity to smile back. Meanwhile, Vila was strutting around, having the time of his life. He was expecting a hero's welcome when he got home. Tragically, his parade was casting sunlight and chirping songbirds onto her funeral, and she hated him for it. "Where's your shirt? You're out of uniform," she demanded, with as much self-righteous indignation as she could muster. But she was not ready to hear his response. "In my pack. It is too hot for it, and the sun. I must enjoy it while summer lasts," he insisted. "Summer!" she spluttered. "Yes, in Helveste, there are only 2 seasons, summer and winter," he explained. "It's cloudy and snowing." In Helveste, we have no mosquitoes," Vila agreed. However, he was not looking toward the city. Instead, his dark gaze was north, toward the great snow-capped volcano that could be seen even from the province south of Helveste on a clear day. "There, do you see Helveste? Have you seen anything so beautiful?" he marveled out loud. Nora shrugged. "The lighthouse is impressive," she admitted glumly. "It wasn't anything like Founder's Keep or the Dragon's Hall's watchtower in Glendon." "No, that is Helveste," Vila insisted. Nora blinked and turned. "Oh, I thought you were talking about the city," she remarked in surprise. "No, that is not Helveste. That is Helveste. Everything is named after her," Vila explained. Nora let out another vexed, withering sigh. Everything was named Helveste. There was Helveste, the province, Helveste, the capital, the Helveste Strait, the Helveste Inn, the Helveste Port, the Helveste Clothing Shop, and yes, of course, it was named after the goddess Helveste. Helveste was a local god, not officially recognized in the pantheon. There were many locally observed gods and spirits in every province and town. The pantheon was a shrine or temple that held images that represented gods within it, or at least the top universally recognized gods in all of Marne. "Oh yes, blessed be her name," Nora murmured. Well, Nora wasn't exactly a devout follower of Helveste. She gave her respects. It was the proper thing to do. The last thing she wanted was to cause a ruckus or disturb a local god. While Nora was a devout believer and burned incense regularly to the pantheon, she got a little annoyed at the thought of some overly zealous believers in the business of deifying every local spirit, hill, den, shrub, doorstop, and trickle of water. If people made a mountain of a god, the next proclaimed oracle could just as easily build a shrine for every damned grassy knoll or ant mound. Well, Nora firmly believed one shouldn't blatantly disrespect the local spirits. If she had favor with Sprigga, the goddess of the earth and new beginnings, the local spirits connected to the earth wouldn't harm her. That is, if Maltine, the god of trial, testing, and all-around misfortune, had anything to do with it. Maltine was a controversial god. No one would dare remove him from the pantheon for fear of the perceived retribution to follow. Devout Maltine worshippers went about playing pranks on their fellows to keep Maltine entertained and distracted, so that he did not get up to any real mischief. Hence the saying, if anyone was acting a fool, or when things were unforeseeably out of place and going horribly wrong, you should always shout, "Side of Maltine!" Because if Maltine was not credited, he would be insulted and feel obligated to do something far worse. The crackling sound of parcel paper being torn open brought Nora back, and then she glanced over toward Vila and frowned when she caught the sweet smell of tiny yet expensive bundle of beeswax candles. "What are you doing?" she demanded. Vila merely smirked as he pulled out a fine paper hoop. He didn't need to, and wasn't going to explain himself. She already knew what he was doing. But it wasn't so much as to what he was doing that bothered her, but the promise that he had broken. Nora's face darkened, angrier now that Vila didn't so much as recognize what he was doing or bother apologizing. As much as it hurt, she wasn't going to let it go. "You swore," Nora insisted. "Yes, I promised I would not buy any more this month. But I did not say I would stop lighting them," he agreed. Nora's fiery blue eyes shot down toward the large burlap sack at his feet, and turned toward the smiling cleric, who had a faraway look as he gazed wistfully out north toward the great mountain Helveste. As he smiled and patted the heavy money pouch full of silver beneath his robes. "Son of Maltine, how much did you spend on candles and rice paper?" Nora demanded. But her anger and scathing words of disapproval were like water to a duck. "I swore an oath. If Helvesti spared your life, I would give thanks and offerings every day," Vila insisted stoically, and smiled as he lit the candle and watched the sweet-smelling lantern be carried off into the cloudy gray sky. "It's a bloody fire hazard," Nora growled irritably. Not so. The wind is going north, and the ship is sailing northwest," he announced confidently. Nora responded with a pointed sarcasm. "Well, it's a good thing the wind never changes direction." Vila's smile faded, then let out a small grunt. That, of course, would be the closest thing she would ever get to him admitting that she was right. By Sprigga, Vila was a stubborn bull. Even if she used her abilities to shake him up and down in the air, he would never give in. She wouldn't ever do that, but she wanted to. "I give my word. I will not light any more until we are off the ship," Vila declared stoically. Right at that moment, the large three-masted cargo ship slowly turned into port. Nora shot him an angry glare. I should order you to stay on board and guard the ship, she threatened grouchily. You could, but I would not follow it, he shrugged. I swore an oath to follow and protect you, so therefore you cannot order me to stay behind, he insisted. I thought guardians also swore oaths to obey their magi, she teased. But Vila was not fazed. The spirit of the oath is greater than the words spoken. I swore first to protect, and then to serve. Therefore, technically, I don't have to obey anything you say. If I feel it puts you in danger, he shrugged. You should have been a lawyer, Nora sighed. As much as she wanted to be happy, she couldn't help but feel resentful. After all, her punishment was Vila's reward. She had lost her dragon and killed a renowned field healer, but Vila, her sword companion, had dragged her out of a lake, revived her, and carried her kicking and screaming for miles over mountain and valley back to Founder's Keep. Yes, Vila had saved her and was entitled to a handsome reward. Being from Halvisti was a win-win for everyone. Vila, the brave sword companion, would be rewarded, and Nora Frey, the loathsome, derelict Fink, would be sent away. Far, far, far away. Out of sight and out of mind. When the ship was secured, the cleric raised his voice, and all eyes turned toward the north. Blessed be Helvisti for granting us a safe voyage. Amen, blessed be your name, chorused the crew. Once the prayer was over, Vila glanced down, but his burlap sack that had been at his feet was gone. Vila turned. Nora smiled back at him as she hefted up the large bundle in her arms. Blessed be her name, she chimed right before she dropped the sack into the ocean. But the reaction she had hoped to get did not come. Vila did not protest. He did not try to get her to stop. May it always be so, he responded sagely. Nora immediately felt a stab of guilt wash over her. But she was surprised Vila was not upset. She didn't even sense it through the soul bond. Disappointed, but not angry or upset. She could never get Vila to be upset. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, she began. But Vila had already turned away. Nora followed after him into the cozy, candlelit cabin and silently stood in the doorway as Vila gathered up his things. Vila, I'm sorry, she tried to apologize again. I shall prevail, he assured her. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she ripped the scarf from her face. Is there any way I can make it up to you? She insisted. Vila smiled. I request permission to go to the Holy Mountain, he announced. Nora blinked and then frowned as she realized what mountain he was referring to. The thought of being alone ate at her stomach. Yet, surely he deserved some space, as she had been such a spiteful toad lately. And yet, she hated the thought of him going out into the cold northern waste by himself. Yes, it was his job to protect her, yet at the same time, she protected him as well. She was a war mage. Vila's job was to find trouble before it found them, and her job was to destroy it. Alone? She asked hesitantly. Part of her hoped she would be invited along. No, not exactly alone, Vila assured her. Nora lowered her gaze. Without me, she whispered. I need to complete the journey without magic of any kind, he insisted. Nora looked away. I understand, she said at last. It won't be long, he assured her. Nora didn't look back. Of course, she agreed robotically. Vila grunted. It is necessary. I would not be any help to you if I went soft. Besides, you will need time to get to know your new dragon, he encouraged her. Nora pressed her lips together. I don't want another dragon. I don't want to fly anymore, she cursed bitterly. But just as she felt as if she was going to burst into tears, Vila was at her side, and she closed her eyes as she leaned into his strong, tattooed arms and melted into his embrace. I feel your pain, Vila whispered. This was not mere words. Through their soul bond, Vila could indeed feel the empty, aching cavern of guilt and sadness inside her. Another dragon won't make it better. It won't be the same, she sniffed. It will be different, he agreed. Please don't go, she begged. The sooner I leave, the sooner I can come back, he assured her. Nora gave her a reluctant nod and smiled up at him. She knew it had to be done. Vila, her sword companion, was a wildling at heart. She had the authority to compel him to do whatever she wished, yet she would hate herself for doing so. Horses needed to run, dragons needed to fly, mages needed to wield magic, and men of war, men like Vila, needed to climb mountains, to hunt and to fight. As much as she longed to remain in his arms, she was going to love it even more when he returned, seething with vigor, the smell of smoke, musk, and pine in his hair. It wasn't easy being a sword companion, especially since the sword companions were typically the most skilled of the fighting class, who were tasked to protect their mage counterparts. After all, a mage could start a cooking fire and send a whole army of infantry running in a mere seconds, without any help at all. Yet the mage's sword companion role was a vital one. While one mage could destroy an army, one crossbowman hidden in the trees could kill a mage. Thus, the sword companion's job was to protect against, find, and or avoid such enemies. To do this well, they had to be extremely vigilant, skilled in both battle, tactics, and tracking. These skills not only needed to be kept sharp, but appreciated by sword companion and mage as well. It was easy for a mage to mock their companion's efforts and struggles to do simple, mundane tasks, such as make a shelter, light a fire, catch a fish, or to fight with fists or weapons. Accomplished field mages could do all these things and much more. That's, of course, when they were not injured, exhausted, or startled, or wished to remain anonymous. Any frivolous spellcasting while on campaign would likely paint them as targets by both assassin and other enemy mages alike. Please be safe, she said at last. She knew this was a silly thing to request, going out into the cold Helvisti wilderness was the exact opposite of safe. That was the whole bloody point of going. To struggle, to be chilled to the bone, to make shelter, to build fire, to hunt, to go close as death as possible, and then to laugh and come back. Vila chuckled softly. "Safe," said the mage, who plays with fire magic and tames dragons. Nora grinned. Dragons. They were extremely dangerous. She wasn't really sure what to compare them to. Men. Yes, she thought. You didn't really want to tame them. A tame dragon was a miserable thing. Vila's large hands moved to pull away her fur coat. Oh, as much as she wanted him to rip off all her clothes right then and there, she stopped him. Her hands gripped his, and she closed her eyes. She could feel his heart pounding in his ears. It was intoxicating. Her eyes fluttered. She felt shivers run over her body. "Come back to me quickly," she teased, and smiled to herself when she felt the flustered, rumbling growl resonate within Vila's chest. That smile faded the moment Vila pulled away from her, began gathering his things into his pack. Flustered, Nora turned, her face flushed red, her blue eyes alight with desire. "What are you doing?" she exclaimed. Vila apathetically gave his shoulders a dismissive shrug. "Packing for my pilgrimage," he grunted. If there was anything Nora hated more, it was being ignored. She wanted to light his pack on fire and cut holes in his clothes, but she wasn't about to give him the satisfaction of allowing him to see her lose her mind. Not again, anyway. Instead, she moved toward her own luggage, where she struggled to keep her focus on simple levitation spells as she floated odds and ends neatly into her polished wooden travel chest. A hefty, plump feathered pillow came whizzing through the air and knocked her upside the head, causing her to lose all concentration. Everything came running down onto the floor. Her makeup, her perfume, her clothes and journal. Nora turned, but Vila nonchalantly continued to cinch up the strings to his ruck. However, when he turned to leave, Nora ran and leapt on top of him. This time, Vila did not disappoint, as he effortlessly flipped her head over heels onto the bed and began showering her with passionate, fiery kisses. Not all sword companions and their mages were lovers. Not all were soul-bonded. But it wasn't entirely unheard of either. Alright, that was Chapter 1 of Founder's Keep.